one of the first conversations that we've had, in fact, before we even started the business, was what values do we want to create as part of the organization, which is, crazy to think that, as two people to think about values if we haven't even won our first customers. But I think it's those type of conversations that we had early on that makes us who we are today. At times of crisis, at times of difficult decisions, helps you as a guideline, as a North Star, and it helps you make decisions that are good within yourself, where you feel comfortable that you have done the right thing. And I think oftentimes as founders, we suffer from decision fatigue. There's so many decisions we need to make on a daily basis, but having those guardrails to guide you towards making those decisions, I think are really key. And you can explain that to your team of why you make certain decisions, because they're in line with the values that you do. And I think my advice that I can give business leaders is pass that message on to your team, pass that message on to the people that you can see are able to create great things, because you have little understanding of how much impact that has to that one person.
Please give me a minute of your time. If analytics are to be believed, you're more likely to be a listener than a subscriber. No, this isn't a plea for your money, but it is a plea for your support, which can be free. The good news is you're already doing the hard part by taking the time to listen to conversations that are consequential. This show is still being built episode by episode, guest by guest, and your subscription and feedback helps me to determine who to invite, what to ask, so we can ensure that we deliver the most consequential content to you possible. So please, take a moment to subscribe on your platform of choice. Thank you for listening. Now, let's get on with the show. Most technology transformations do not stall because the technology fails. They stall because the organization was never resolved a prior question. What, precisely, are we trying to change, and who is actually accountable for the change, surviving contact with the business? Pascal Uerlings has spent 6 years working at that unresolved question. As co-founder of Jarvis, he has built one of Australia's more prominent Salesforce and AI implementation consultancies, and in doing so, has watched the same failure pattern repeat across organizations of every size. The point that impresses the board but never reaches production, the AI initiative that generates enthusiasm in the strategy deck and entropy in the operating model. The gap between what leaders believe is being adopted and what the business is actually doing on a Tuesday afternoon. His argument, developed through more than 100 implementations across financial services, government, hospitality, and now the frontier of agentic AI, is that the problem is rarely technical. It is structural, cultural, and in no small part a question of whether anyone in the room is willing to say what is actually happening. Jarvis is now repositioning from a Salesforce implementation partner to an AI-native transformation consultancy. That is not a marketing decision. It is a bet about where the real work of organizational change is heading and what it will require of the leaders asked to carry it. Today's conversation is about what that actually demands. Pascal Uerlings, welcome to On the Subject of Leadership.
Thank you for having me, Robert. A real pleasure to be here.
And my pleasure to have you. We've known each other for a few years now, actually. I'd say going back probably about 5 or 6 years. I sort of feel, wasn't quite there to sort of see the inception of Jarvis, but I feel our professional relationship started not too long after it.
Yeah, very much so. I think I remember the days when we were working with your previous company. It was one of our first clients, and a real blessing in disguise to have a customer like that company, like Standards. But it was a real pleasure to meet you as well, and be an advocate of ours for so many years. So I just want to say a massive thank you for everything you've done for us, and I look forward for this conversation on leadership, which I think is very topical in today's day and age.
Look, my pleasure. And I think it's one of the great joys that I have in corporate life. We spend so much time doing work that, particularly because a lot of my roles have been more operational, more inwardly facing, it's often the invisible work of a company. And part of the reason why I run a podcast, part of the reason why I write is I do love the idea of legacy, the idea that we do something that will have value for people that come after us. And certainly working with you and Jarvis, I could very much see that in play. So it was an absolute delight to, I guess, be one of those consistent contracts that helps in the early days of a company when so many businesses at that sort of small startup phase fail. So it was wonderful to see it grow, and also to see the philosophy that you and Giannis have brought with it, which I think really brings me into one of the first areas I'd like to have a bit of a dive into, which is that you and Giannis really started at quite a large corporate consultancy, DXC Technology, before founding Java. So what specifically did you observe there that made you conclude the model was wrong, rather than just you were at the wrong firm?
I think to understand why we started Jarvis, I think it's important to look back at how I grew up, and I think where my aspirations were when I'm originally from Belgium and moved to Australia in 2016 with a real idea to just travel across Australia for about 6 months and then go back to focusing on a consulting career like many of my peers would do back home. But I decided to go here with my partner and decided to stay long term. And Australia is such a great country that allows you to give you the opportunities when you take them, firsthand. And little did I know about technology at the time, because I come from a business degree. So when I got to Australia and got introduced to someone who was running a Salesforce consulting shop, I was pretty scared and in the deep end, because I didn't understand the terminology. I remember vividly, being in a meeting talking about an RFP review for a government agency here in New South Wales, and everyone was throwing some keywords, and I was like, there's no chance I will survive here. There is no chance they will accept me because I don't have the background of IT. I don't have the background of Salesforce. So massive doubts about myself, especially in the early days, which is something that's carried through my journey, that I still carry today. But that actually didn't stop me from, working up the ladder around my experience within consulting. So I got to embrace that discomfort. I got to learn a lot more on sales and what it takes to sell within consulting. And it's not an easy task. But I also got to learn around the delivery side of things. So I was working with a Scrum Master at the time, who was a massive mentor of mine, and very grateful for her leadership. And really to think about what it takes to deliver from sales to actually a solution that customers can use and reuse, and really future-proof them. And then I got to learn a little bit more. I had a decision to make around where my career is going to go. So I had two options. The CEO came to me and said, Pascal, we love what you're doing on the sales admin front. You're doing really well on the operations. But I was frustrated. I was frustrated because, I was paid peanuts at the time. And I was hearing about consulting and all the work that they were doing, and the value that it provided versus an operations world. So, my mind goes like, okay, cool. If you want to stay in Australia, maybe you need to develop some deeper skills and go down the consulting path. So that's the two decisions I had to make. But the CEO convinced me to focus more on the internal side, the operation side of the business, which ultimately led me to learn more about resource management. How do you build high performing teams? How do you recruit effectively? How do you recruit the right people? And ultimately be the right hand man of the CEO today, which is really exciting at the time as a young backpacker. To be able to be someone's trusted person within 9 months was unreal. And then, being there for about 2 years and, really comfortable and confident about where the business was going. They were growing really rapidly. There was Australia's one of the largest Salesforce partners as well, and growing to as well 100 people before they got going through acquisition, and DXC acquired them, which I then took over the strategy and operations side of the role, which is something that I was doing, which is quite similar. And I was going with big expectations because, if you remember, I grew up in an entrepreneurial background, and I always wanted to prove myself that I could work in a big multinational as well. So it was actually quite exciting to work into a multinational company. But quickly did I realize that, culture clashes are real. When we used to work in a nimble team where we're here for each other, we support each other, to working to a, multi-billion-dollar company with thousands of employees, it's suddenly just a number. that was hard pill to swallow. And I think over the years, you can start to see and observe why and where do you actually thrive in an environment that's good for you and good for your mental well-being, but also to your personal development. And, I remember I was going through pay review cycles, and at the time it was, well, you don't have enough years of experience, so we can't give you that, the salary that you were asking or you were worth, which was kind of a bit of a punch in the stomach, right? Because I think I was delivering a lot of value, I was bringing a lot of revenue to the business, yet the only consideration, the only evaluation was, oh, you don't have enough years of experience to give you that. And that was a moment where I felt like it wasn't the right place for me long term. That's the way I knew something will have to change, and because my parents are from an entrepreneurial background, I knew that maybe I should start something on my own. But I couldn't do it by myself. Like I'm from an operations background, and I needed to have someone that was technically strong. And the moment when DXC announced a change in the Salesforce practice, where we weren't consultant and we were all part of the leadership team, I think for us was the moment where, okay, I think we need to do something differently. And Yanis and I started Jarvis at the time. So that's the kind of key moments where it led us to start Jarvis.
And that is it feels almost a bit of a contradiction in that tech firms are being now, I guess, I think Apple recently celebrated its 50th anniversary, so they're starting to see some longevity. But I guess culturally, tech has always been considered this young person's thing. You've got your startup, you're a billionaire in your 20s, CEO of a big corporation. Yet it's the very same tech companies that so often push back against employees. It's fine for the founder or primary shareholder to get the promotions and the big check, but I'm sorry, you're only 26. I mean, we can't make you a senior manager. Hang on a second, you're 24 and you're CEO. And that I've always found an interesting cultural mismatch, and it sort of takes me a little bit to the realm of sport, where I've often seen some players criticised for you can't put them in an international side; they're only in their teens. But as one commentator said, if you're good enough, you're old enough, and that I think really should be the metric. But sadly, too often organisations are really looking more for an insurance policy than they are necessarily a high performing employee. So just picking up also on some of the language you were using about language there, I think you wrote on LinkedIn once that you felt alienated by the numbers-driven corporate ethos of some previous big firms that you work for. Alienated feels like a fairly strong word. So what does a genuinely people-centered consultancy actually do differently in practice beyond the language it uses to describe itself?
I think large organization obviously numbers driven, right? Very much around the bottom line ultimately, and it's fair. I mean, that's what runs every business across every organization, small or large. There's a difference in organization focusing on numbers as a means to an end, or as the vehicle to drive things forward. And I think for us as an organization, we always thought about numbers as an outcome. As a result, we didn't start a company and say, yes, we want to be a $15 million company in year 5. I mean, that's not how we thought about it. I think one of the first conversations that we've had, in fact, before we even started the business, was what the values do we want to create as part of the organization, which is, crazy to think that, as two people to think about values if we haven't even won our first customers. But I think it's those type of conversations that we had early on that makes us who we are today. And I always refer back to that conversation that we had at the Telstra building, where I was asking Yanis and said, like, hey, what are your 2 most important values when you think about building a business? And for him, it was all around curiosity. As consultants, we need to be able to be curious and stay curious, because customers want your advice, they value your input, but you need to stay curious in terms of the technology. You need to stay curious in terms of the business problems that your customers face. And you need to stay curious, in conversations, because I think it's that human connection that's so important. And today is even more important than before. And I think for me, it was very much around authenticity. Right? I think I've come from a background where it wasn't always difficult to accept who I was when I was growing up, as part of the LGBTQI plus A plus community. I think it was difficult. But I felt like when I was joining, system partners at the time, where I had the pressure from being new to the country, I had the pressure from having to fit in from a technology perspective. I also had to fit in as who I was as a person. And I think those pressures were real, and I think were really difficult. So I said to myself and to Yanis, I said, I don't want anyone that joins our business to not be who they are. Because I think if you're creating an environment where people feel comfortable, that's a pressure less that they have to worry about, and that they can focus more on the work or on the people, the conversations, and create something that they never thought was possible before. And I think that to me was a huge part of the creation of Jarvis, and we have done many initiatives around that. But I think that's how I distinguish between numbers-driven businesses who start pretty much with a business plan and say, okay, this is where we're going to go as a business, this is how much target, the growth, and so on and so forth. And don't get me wrong, we had ambitious goals, but it wasn't the foundation. The foundation was, what do we want to do differently? What are the values we want to instill as part of this organization, and create an environment where everyone can thrive today?
And I think that, for me, is one of the things I find to be so beautiful about Jarvis. So many organizations, when I look into them, they've always got a very prosaic founder's story that's clearly been, shall we say, heavily edited after the fact. But what I think so beautiful about Jarvis is that you started where organizations should, which is, what is the cultural makeup that we want? Too often it's, look, let's ship some product, let's get some revenue in, let's satisfy our investors. Then actually let's do a whole big culture piece once we kind of get to year 3. But by that point, so much culture within an organization, particularly if it grows fast and gets a lot of employees on board, the culture will form itself as you go, whether you've taken an active hand or not. So I think to do it so purposefully and with such intent, really speaks volumes to why everyone I've spoken to at Jarvis genuinely loves working there. And people that have moved on often actually return to the company again, because it is just that place that the grass seems greener in another field, but you actually work out you were in a beautifully green environment. And I think that really comes always back to companies that are still founder led. The founder does just drive that culture so strongly.
And don't get me wrong, like, I don't want to give the impression that everything is perfect, by just starting with the cultural foundation. But I think what it does give you is, at times of crisis, at times of difficult decisions, helps you as a guidelines, as a North Star, and it helps you make decisions that are good within yourself, where you feel comfortable that you have done the right thing. And I think oftentimes as founders, we suffer from decision fatigue. There's so many decisions we need to make on a daily basis. But having those guardrails to guide you towards making those decisions, I think, are really key. And you can explain that to your team of why you make certain decisions, because they're in line with the values that you do. And I think if somebody doesn't make the decision that's in line with the values or the guiding principles, then you can hold people accountable as well. So I think it works both ways for our people and for leadership as well, to keep everybody honest and accountable as we grow. Because, like you said, as a small team, it's quite easy to keep the culture together, because you work with people on a daily basis, you get together a lot more frequently. And I think as you grow, that becomes a challenge. That becomes a bottleneck that we need to have other people chip in. Otherwise, the business won't scale and keep that unique culture that we've been able to create. So, throughout that journey, we had to think about how do we scale that culture.
Yeah, and I think going back almost even before the culture scaling starts, it's probably something that everyone who's sitting at home now thinking, I'm wanting to start maybe my own business, my own consultancy. And I guess it's close to my heart because my wife recently started her own business.
And that's amazing.
Walk me through, I guess, that week, because you launched, what was it, I think in April 2020. Walk me through that week, that you decided to proceed, the point at which you fire the starting gun. What I'm interested in is, what was the counter argument, the strongest case for waiting, and why did you know that wasn't the right thing to do? It was the time to pull the trigger.
Yeah, I think if you look at research as well, like it kind of tells you that taking the leap is actually the hardest decision to make, and that's where a lot of people decide to become founders or stay employees. Is actually making that step and finding the courage and the willingness to make that step in an unknown environment. I think that's the biggest struggle that people face, or that I have spoken to that have created or haven't created the business. It's always that, am I ready for this? I think it's very real, and I think it's very important for people to understand that when Yanis and I decided to launch Jarvis, it's always something that was on our mind. Like, it's not like you go like, screw this, let's do it. It's a build up. It's something that you contemplating, you're thinking about, and you kind of need to accept the uncertainty that comes with it. I think having been comfortable in uncertainty and being comfortable in the unknowns is the first capital strength. You're looking for comfort and confidence. Entrepreneurship is not the right thing for you. I mean, there's so many examples I can share where you have to let go of control. It's unreal, like, as part of the growth of the business. But you need to be comfortable, and I think once you are, you need to be able to find the right people. So I think I always knew I wanted to do it, and then I was thinking about, well, I can't do it on my own. I want to do it with someone I can trust. And I think finding the right founder, co-founder, is a task on its own that is quite difficult. You hear a lot of stories sometimes, co-founders, splitting, disagreeing, and I think there's a piece to be done on how do you work with a co-founder. But having, again, Yanis is German, I'm Belgian, strong values aligned. We grew up similarly. Our thinking is very much different, but again, the foundation is there. So no real question around, is it a good idea or not? We felt like it was a right thing to do. Now, it comes to timing. It felt like they were the right thing because they were looking at the market. We did some market analysis, right, at that time without AI. So we had to do our own research and read out the real articles and what was going on. But it was talking to Salesforce. It was talking to the different people in our ecosystem to just test the waters. Was there space for a consultancy like ours? And if so, what would be the easiest way of getting in or breaking into that space? And there was a time where there was a lot of acquisition happening during that time, right before COVID. So there was a lot of space for small and nimble partners to start working with customers like Standards Australia at the time. So that kind of gave us the confidence that, yes, we have some early supporters to be able to get us on that journey. Right? So I think it's important that, if you do start your own thing or you're considering, that you have supporters. And that can include family, but it needs also to be people from your network, people that know the ecosystem as well and the industry that you want to create something. And then we pulled the trigger. We said, you know what, let's create ABN. Let's have Yanis resign first, and then I'll resign after. And then little did we know that literally 2 weeks after we resigned, we hear about COVID. We hear about what's going on in the market and in the world.
What a time.
We're like, this is not going to happen in Australia. We'll be fine. And little did we know at the time that, that was going to happen.
Wow. Yeah. And earlier in this interview, you were talking about, as you were starting out, not just with Jarvis in particular, but your career more generally, and sitting in meetings and just hearing vocabulary just flying backwards and forth and feeling that, I'll call it a sense of insecurity. And it's something actually I hear often from founders. They'll often describe it as imposter syndrome. And I usually sort of say, well, there are genuine imposters, people who actually can't do what they claim to do but are just faking it till they make it, versus people who are of real substance and quality. But perhaps partly down to their personality, people that are often a little bit more introverted will tend to be run over the top of by the more sort of A-type or dominant personalities. And so they develop those insecurities. But there's also that paradox in the sense with a leader who needs to, I think at their best, demonstrate their humanity, that they have fears. It's not that they go out and do great things because they're fearless. Actually, no, true courage is you fear something, but you overcome it. And that, I suppose, is that journey that you've also had to go on yourself as a leader. And what began to break that pattern from, I suppose I would term it performed insecurity, until you were gradually recalibrating to not lose that humanity, but also project enough confidence that people do want to follow and do trust your vision?
I mean, very, very topical. I mean, it's a battle that I still have today. Every day, really, in different conversations like today. You feel like, oh, am I good enough? Do I have the content to share that will resonate? I mean, you always have those questions in your mind, and I think that's just the natural brain of the human being. And I think accepting that is normal is the first step in being comfortable with it. And I think what shifted my thinking is because at the beginning I was reading so many books around business development, leadership, how you should build your own business, 5 a.m. club, all the things habits that you should implement as a leader that, you feel really guilty of not doing, right? So it's almost like putting pressure on you. It's like, well, you read the book, and now why don't you implement it, right? And I think it's great to have inspiration on these different leadership articles, and I thank you for bringing the realness to life, because I think that's really important. But also then looking at what's best for you, what's working for you, and find the things that help you most. I don't think it's always about applying every single bit of article, book that we read, but actually trying to nuance that and actually apply it to your day-to-day. That will make a difference for you in a small incremental way, right? You don't become the visionary leader overnight. You don't. And sometimes I think that's where the confusion comes from. You read at the article, those billion-dollar founders at 25 years old, or 30 years old, or 35. They don't become that overnight. That is not an overnight success story. And I think about the iceberg analogy, right? You oftentimes see the success. You see what's on LinkedIn. You see what's been talked about you, but you don't see the work that the person had to get to in order for them to be able to be acknowledged in the way that they are. And I think that's where the real work starts. And I think for us, starting the business, where you start managing people that are older than you, starting to present to clients that are Australia-based and have that mate culture, and you don't really fit in. You're from Belgium. You've got different weaknesses, and they'll judge you from your accent. They'll judge you for this. And I think being comfortable with that, and also accepting that imposter syndrome is a good thing. Actually changing the narrative that a lot of people think that imposter syndrome is a bad thing, but in my eyes and in my view is the reason you're feeling that way is because you care about the conversation, you care about the client, you care about doing a good job. And that means that what is the output of that? I do my research, I practice, I do things that if I didn't have that feeling, I probably wouldn't do, right? So I think realizing that it's not necessarily a bad thing, it actually can be a superpower, and changing that into something that will help you in the future, it is something that really helped me grow the business and be where I am today.
I think that's such a vital theme that you've pulled on there, because as organizations grow, I mean, one of the first things they always tell you when you step into management is you need to learn to delegate. But you feel that stress because you want the job done to a certain level of quality you can produce, and there's that fear of, will the team do it? And I think that there is that interesting tipping point where there's a difference between trusting your team and genuinely not caring if they do it differently. And I think some managers often do tip into that last bit. They become almost so jaded. They're largely getting the quarterly results they need. So, whatever, they stop caring about the quality of the work. But I think for people that do feel that that imposter syndrome, that sense of insecurity, that need to do it well, it always sort of reminds me of the great actor Laurence Olivier, who at the peak of his career, when he'd run his Oscars internationally famous, he started to get stage fright. And people were just confused. How can such a great actor experience stage fright? But it's because he cared so much about giving the audience the performance they turned up to expect from the great Laurence Olivier that was what was subtly undermining. So I think the discipline in the way in which leaders manage that inattention, I really think makes the difference between good and great leadership.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more with what you just said. So I mean, you would know from your arts background that is a fundamental of a good performance. Right?
Yeah. It is. I want to switch topics. And I'm always hesitant to raise AI because it's just, it feels like such a vogue topic. It's almost a bit like they always say at dinner parties, never talk about the weather. It's just too boring. I almost sort of feel never talk about AI. It's just too boring. But it's also, it is so topical. One can't move past the elephant, or I suppose more the blue whale in the room. Certainly in our conversations, I've often heard you argue that most AI projects fail not because of the technology or the data, but because of pilots without a path to production. So I guess in the work with Jarvis and your conversations in the wider consulting community, what organisation dynamics do you think actually produce that failure? And who's the maker of the decisions that lead there?
I love talking about AI because you could be spending so much time and there's so much different perspective on it, which I find, quite remarkable topic. And everyone has different skills and different advancement in their knowledge around AI, which is, if you ask someone on the street, what do you think about AI, and you get 5 different responses, which is fascinating. We are technology, so we are right in it, right? So I think that's always giving us a little bit of an edge. And when you go to these dinner parties and you say, how are you using AI? And say, I'm using it for writing an email, or I'm using it for review, the recipe for my dinner for my kids. You're like, is that it? So it's really interesting how different people use AI in the world. And from a business point of view, we've had the fortunate position to be one of the early adopters of Agentforce when it comes to implementing it to Australia's some of the largest clients. And it was interesting to observe which ones were successful and which ones weren't. And everyone, if I kind of go through the life cycle, it started with oh shit moment when ChatGPT launched their model, and everybody was scared of what it's going to mean for them. But I think a year after, some of the businesses were willing to adopt it and try it, and it was very much of a trial. I didn't feel like there was real pressure from the board, last year, or there were any proven technology or initiatives that were willing to go. So the early adopters that decided to go on the Agentforce path, in particular, 80 or 90% didn't go to production. And looking back at that, and was because there weren't clear metrics in place to measure success. They all wanted to try it and see how it works, but there was no real KPI. So what that meant was focusing on the wrong use case, that people weren't necessarily consulted, people just heard about it and were, brought onto the journey, which ultimately, from a technology, led to a really cool, artifact or a really cool feature to show internally, but really lacking into the CEO language to say, okay, what business benefit does it actually drive? And who can actually vouch for it? If you think about everyone being scared and not everyone being brought on a journey, why would you give it that much credit if you might be scared of losing your job, right? So I think at the time it wasn't really the right time to see that path to production, which is, I think, today very much different. I think today we see a lot more pressure from boards to innovate, to cut costs, to increase profitability. And AI is a real part of people's strategy and company strategies. And I think what we always say to new customers now, or existing customers who want to go on that journey, is be really, really clear on the metrics that you want to influence. And let's work backwards around what easy use cases we can do. But also let's paint the vision for the next 3-4 years, because if you don't have that, you can't build a roadmap of how you automate, AI or building AI tools into your business. But the piece that's probably the fundamental is the enablement of the people. And I see it at Jarvis. We launched Claude across the business, and it takes time for people to be comfortable with the tool. It takes time for people to experiment, to do it in the right, respectful manner, so it protects data, clients' data and everything else. It's a journey. So for us, even like to expect our people to go from 0 to 50% efficiency is wrong. And I think that's what we've seen as well in our customers. So really taking a step back and focusing on education, change management. What does it mean for you? How does it mean for you long term? And created that culture, again, of being safe or feeling safe and using the tools that will help you make your job better and more effectively is, I think, beginning of a successful implementation.
And that education piece, I think, is so key. Too often organizations, particularly when I talk more, I think to CEOs and board members, they often tend to see it as a ultimate right-sizing exercise. We employ 700 people to generate X profit. Surely we could do that with 550 if we implemented AI. But maybe, but also it's not about just that. It's also about, but even if that was an achievable goal, even if that was a virtuous goal, and let's leave the ethics aside for a moment, can that even be done in the type of timeframes you're talking about? And I think so often there is that idea of, but if we're implementing AI in May, then we should start seeing it in the July quarter. We'll see the revenue needle move, and if we haven't, then what's gone wrong? But I think that does keep coming back to the education, and also part to what you've written about in the past, which I think is could be best termed as a 4-part formula for AI implementations that work. And I think point number 1 you had was the idea of starting with the business outcome first, then defining the production success up front, assigning change management accountability from day one, and committing to ongoing measurement. So I think of those 4 items, which do you see most consistently missing in the implementations that you work on?
I think there's probably the two items. I think it's a change management, finding someone that's actually going to be an owner of the agentic platform, because it touches across multiple dimensions of the business. It doesn't follow your standard business line or departments and go like, yeah, this is an operations function, this is a sales function. It's actually, you're building agentic workflows that are across departments and impacts more departments. So you then have this conflicting environment where who actually owns it. And I think that's where it clearly needs to be defined and owned and upskilled and to ensure that people can monitor it and feel like they're part of that journey. Because if they're just being imposed, then it's not gonna be successful. And I think the last part is ongoing change and tweaking to the agents, because they're evolving so quickly. In fact, I just had to relaunch my Claude 5 times yesterday just because of the amount of updates that are happening. I mean, you just need to imagine how much this is going at such fast pace that if you do not continuously invest and if you don't put budget aside to continuously iterate on the development of the agentic use cases, your tool will only be working for the moment you've gone live, and maybe 1 or 2 weeks. So how do you, stay up to date with the latest technology? By having continuous development plan, and that is either through consultancy or to your internal members. But that needs to be a part of the strategy. Otherwise, your agentic workflows won't scale.
Yeah, I remember actually thinking about that volume going back to the early days of not so much the internet, but I think more social media, when people started to put more and more content online because it was so easy to put online. Your Facebook status update was a thing you could, couple of taps and now it's live. You don't need to know HTML. You don't have to build a website or get a domain name. Your information, your ideas just flow into the ether. I think at the time I read, it's probably about in 2009, 2010, we were adding more information to the world's total sum of knowledge each year than we had in the previous 5,000 years leading up to that. And I feel AI has only supercharged that. I mean, as a writer, if I'm really across my topic, I've got all of my research, I can probably produce 5,000 words in a good day. AI will just pump that out in a couple of minutes, drawing on articles from a cold start. It hasn't even spent weeks doing the background reading. And I think that does make it so hard. And particularly coming back to that change piece you mentioned, that really is so often missing. Get a vendor or partner to implement the AI, and then, hey presto, as an organization, we're AI enabled. But it's, well, your tech stack might be AI enabled, but are your people? And to your point earlier, if you're predominantly using Claude to look up recipes or use it as, I guess, a glorified form of search, you're kind of really missing it. It's the people, I think, that are getting the agents to build the agents, and that's what's causing that pace of development. Voice agents, they're becoming popular. Mostly when I see people these days, they're talking into their phone, but not to someone, it's now to the agent. I think at Jarvis, that came from one of your graduates, didn't it? Who I think brought it along. And what does that implementation tell you about where agentic AI is actually deployable now versus where it remains a boardroom, I'll call it a fantasy, not a conversation?
I mean, I'm so excited about the potential of voice agents in our day-to-day lives. It's, I think, going to be the most impressive revolution that we'll see in the near future when it comes to contact centers. When it comes to calling your favorite brand and asking for a certain change, be it an airline or be it a return for item that you bought. Just being able to make things happen quickly and make changes for you is what really excites me, because how much time do we waste on on lines in the queues and listening to those strange songs that don't get updated at all, and really creating a seamless experience to customers where it can not only create value for me as a consumer, but also a lot of upsell opportunities for businesses as well. And I think the technology is there. I mean, if you look at the work that 11 Labs is doing across the world, it's remarkable. I mean, you can clone your own voice. The latency between question and answer is getting shorter and shorter. The translation capabilities, doesn't matter where and who you're calling from. The agent is able to pick it up and speak natively in that language. It's quite remarkable. And I think with simple prompts, you can stand up and voice agent in the background. Obviously, the workflow aspect is where things need to be more looked after from an architecture delivery standpoint, but the capability itself, and when we showed this to some of our board members in some of our financial services clients, they go like, yeah, I want this. This is exactly what I want. So we're moving away from a pitch where you have to explain the solution and you sell, okay, this is a technology that we're going to implement, blah, 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 to actually selling an outcome, selling something that customers go like, yeah, I want this. I actually don't care what's in the background, but I want this and I want it tomorrow. And I think that's what we're moving to. And I think voice agents is just an example of how that's shifting towards outcome-based delivery models. And that's really exciting. I think there's always still a bit of a hesitation of the customers are asking themselves, are our customers ready to be talking to agents? Are you ready to be talking to agents? Will you feel frustrated? Will you feel disengaged? Will you feel like a lack of priority? So I think humans still have a role to play, but you can think about like high spenders, platinum members, could still have that human feeling, which much less wait time. But some of the high volume items, low value items, can be done through agents. So I don't think it's just replacing the whole workforce. I think it's definitely complementary. And I think I'm really excited about that future.
Yeah, almost for me, it feels a little bit like a going out and what's your dining out experience looking like? Am I looking up at the menu and being handed a tray of food and then wandering off and trying to find somewhere to sit with it? Or am I going into a Michelin star restaurant? I'm surrounded by about half a dozen staff, all of whom are preparing things at the table, flambeing, carving, creating sauces as we go. And I think that, again, depending on where people are at, do I just need a very, very hurried bite because I'm late to pick up my child from daycare, so I just want to get in some calories before we launch into the evening? Or are we actually taking some time, having an experience as much as a meal, and truly enjoying that moment? And I think, to your point, that is such an interesting area in the AI space. It isn't, as we do with anything else in life, it's not one size fits all. It's about what do you want as an individual, what are your tastes, your preferences, but also, where are you at in your given day?
Oh, spot on.
And to an extent, I'm wondering, is this from a consultancy point of view? Because obviously the sales piece, future revenue is a bit of a challenge, in that historically it's often been a case of, well, we've got this cool thing, thinking AI when it first came out, we'll need to demonstrate what it can do to, I guess, generate interest in the product or in the outcomes that can be achieved. Are you starting to see a little bit more of a pull economy, in the sense that either you approach organizations or they approach you with a pre-existing set of use cases? They're very keen on what they're wanting to achieve with it, and you're more trying to unlock that latent potential rather than just helping them to discover what you could even do with this thing when you take it out of the box?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's two different train of thought happening. At Jarvis, I think we're looking at a horizontal place, which is very much, across industries. Use cases can be replicable in airlines, in hospitality, in government. Think about the thinking about the customer and outcome, it's similar. Everyone has the same type of business processes. You have a customer that you need to service, and you have some options to provide to that customer. So I think these are very much repeatable. In fact, if you have more broad experience or diverse experience, the more quality you can provide to that particular customer, because you're not just using the experience from a government agency, but you actually can leverage the complexity of financial services or the experience of a retail customer. So you can actually bring bits and pieces into a unified offering that you can then go to market or to a customer and say, you know what, this is the outcome that you get. These are the things that come out of the box or as part of the accelerator, and then we can implement it a lot cheaper than we were able in the past. And you might wonder, you might ask, okay, well, what does that mean for consulting? So does that mean that there is a future on consulting? And my answer to that is absolutely, because I think once you've had setting it up and getting people going on voice agent is one thing, but then you need to monitor, then you need to tweak, then you need to make sure that the right responses are being addressed. You need to make sure that every agent is addressing it in the right way. You need to make sure that it's consuming credits in the right way, because that's another thing. It doesn't come, free of charge. It does have a cost component, and we see sometimes that these agents are configured in a very expensive way. So I think the ones that will stand out, like the consultancies that will stand out, are the ones that can build an architecture that is scalable, but at the same time also cost efficient. So that you will see more and more that's where the world is going, and I think it's going to be a lot more about continuous support rather than upfront implementations.
And at the risk of, I guess, degenerating into a technical conversation, I want to sort of push some of those points a little bit, because I think they're quite interesting. From my own IT career going back about 20 years, I mean, there was a time when, hey, we've updated Java from 11.1 to 11.1a or something similar, and it was a bit, well, kind of apart from a couple of tech people, who honestly cares? But now when the models move even a tiny release version, it can be such a quantum change in terms of the outputs you get. So I guess that ongoing refinement of models for organizations, it's no longer a case of, look, dump in your AI, have your investment, leave it for 6 to 12 months, maybe 18 months, get some value out of it, then maybe think about doing an iteration. The speed with which the models are changing means that that set and forget is no longer a viable business model.
And we're moving to a world where we're having agents talking to agents. Right? It's one thing to stand up an agent, but to deliver true business outcome and value, you need to make sure it connects to another agent that can do certain tasks at its own. There's one size doesn't fit. We don't have a solution for everything. Like one AI model won't solve the whole business problems. In fact, the future is going to be multiple agents talking to each other, driving outcomes together. And I think that's where the complexity lies. And I think that's where we come in as consultants to really architect that. And it's not too dissimilar to what it was in the past around, APIs and integrations and the elements connecting different systems. Now we're just talking about connecting different agents. So it's kind of like the same patterns to what we've seen in the past, but probably at a higher sophistication level.
Yeah. Switching gears a little bit, and I think turning back to the people, and particularly around generations. I think COVID for many in the workforce, particularly I'll call them more old school managers, felt like it exposed a generation divide that they'd kind of discovered. The idea that older people, shall I call them, were hardworking. They wanted to turn up to an office. They were driven. They were committed. They were loyal to the organization. Whereas there's this new Gen Z group that are now in the workforce, and they want to go to work in their pajamas if they go to work at all, and they're lazy, they're disinterested, they're not engaged with the work. They just want a bit of cash till they get onto their next gig. I think you would certainly say that's a mistypification of the generations, and that Gen Z, far from actually being disengaged, are some of the hardest workers. But a lot of it is how they're often underestimated, and the way they're treated is what actually drives the quality of their outcomes. I'd love to sort of press into that a little bit with you.
I mean, we hear it a lot at the moment, where you see that if you look at the world of which children grow up or adolescents grow up or getting into their first jobs. I mean, they grew up in a world where everything is at their fingertips. If you think about food, if you think about transport, if you think about dating, everything is just a fingertip away. So, if you think from a cultural and societal shift, the expectations of, Gen Z has changed in terms of society, right? They want things faster. They want things done more efficiently. They stand up for things that are important to them that maybe wasn't important to us. So, and I think it's a good thing. I mean, that change of expectation is a good thing because it forces us to think about careers differently, to think about tasks differently, to think about what does the role of a grad mean comparison to a few years ago when think about large companies gaining big intake of grads and shipping all the work to them to do the heavy lifting and having a really healthy profit margin. I mean, if you think about the business model and the people that are complaining the most are probably the people that are most impacted towards their business model, right? And I think it's also an overgeneralization of Gen Z not wanting to do the work. They just want to do meaningful work, and I think they don't want to be doing the work that's can be done through AI or can be done in a different way or in an inefficient way. So oftentimes when people or grads join, in fact we have 5 grads at the moment, which is something I'm really proud of. Two in Melbourne, three in Sydney. And it's something that I never thought was going to be possible. So, very exciting and grateful to have created an environment where we can apply that. And when talking to them, I get to learn about what Gen Z language is and some of the slang, which is always, good for culture, but also seeing the hungerness for if you actually apply and use the latest technologies, they're so into it. They want to learn. They learn faster than we do, and I think that's something that we should be embracing. Give them work that's meaningful. Give them the tools that are relevant today. Don't give them spreadsheets to fill out that are outdated and processes that are outdated, but let them be challenged and let them come up with ideas because some of ideas are freaking awesome. And I think that's what gets missed because if you're not leveraging their talent, these talents in the right way, if you're not talking their language, you will hear a lot more people saying, "Oh, Gen Z is a dead generation. They won't work the way we used to." Why should they work the way we used to? Right.
And those cultural, I'll call them challenges because I think a diverse workforce is a beautiful thing, but it's also a very difficult thing to manage. Management tends to scale very easily when everything is the same because you've got a whole series of widgets and you can apply a style and it just works across them. But certainly in the modern organisation in a multicultural society like Australia, that's just blown out the water. But almost even more so when you start getting even deeper cultural differences because of where people live. And I'm thinking particularly about Jarvis operations that you have in the Philippines. And I can imagine there are certain leadership assumptions that will work in an office in Sydney, maybe even Melbourne, although I do notice an extreme Sydney-Melbourne divide. But I suppose some of those don't translate to the Philippines. And I guess how did you discover that and how do you manage for that?
Philippines, I love them so much. Such an incredible culture, incredible human, so much talent in this country. So it's got a really special place for me. And when we decided to go to the Philippines, it was just through networks. We knew a few people, so for us, it was a no-brainer to open up a shop in the Philippines. And it took some time. I'm not going to lie. It took time to apply some of the cultural foundations that we have in Australia in the Philippines. Because if you think about it, it's a country that got colonized, many times and very much known to just do a task that you're being told, And I think that's the kind of environment they operate. And they come from backgrounds like Accenture, like big GSIs, Deloitte, and so on and so forth. So they're known to just get the job done, but they always have someone in front of them to talk to clients. They never really were exposed to clients. And I think for us, we wanted to create a culture and an environment where they were empowered to be themselves, empowered to have conversation with the client, to raise questions, to raise issues, and also take the credits for the work that they do. And I think that cultural shift took some time to embed into our organization and into their mind. And every year we run a Philippines summit where we get everyone together. And I think it's been the 4th year that we've been running it. And the first year was incredible to see these people, were in COVID and never had seen each other ever. But the moment you bring the people together, they have that instant connection. instant connection and instant complicity, which was something I can't describe. It's something that's just, due to the culture, and something we don't have in Australia, let's be honest. And I think that's where I could see the potential of, if you create an environment where they feel safe, where they feel looked after, because if you think about, a lot of software engineers or people are the first in their families to graduate, are the first to provide for their families as well. So there's a lot of risk attached to changing jobs, and they really value loyalty. So that means that as a business, you want to create an environment where that exchange is real, right? So you got to be listening to what they want, what the frustrations are, and you maybe need to ask it 5 times, to actually really understand what's going on. But once you have cracked that environment, you unlock superpowers, and that's something that I'm so proud of. And then we've seen it together, working on the standards on the project. You have people that are totally owning it, and we didn't have any Australian resources, front loading them. In fact, they were operating on their own, doing showcases, playbacks, demoing to senior stakeholders with confidence, pride, and that's, makes me as a leader one of the most proud, because it's seeing someone that didn't believe in themselves to being confident in delivering and doing something that never thought was possible. That's ultimately my job done.
Yeah. And I think creating that safety really, I mean, it's the centrality to it. I mean, I can certainly attest, working with the Philippine staff, I was always frankly amazed. I mean, I can't really carry on a conversation in another language, let alone actually perform a complex technical presentation and then answer questions from stakeholders who sometimes are frankly a bit hostile to the project. But the way in which they parried that, maintained their composure, and were actually able to carry it to, I won't necessarily say converting the stakeholders to be enthusiastic advocates. They're just people who are just too negative to ever be that, but they cease to be the detractors they were before the demo or the presentation. And that, I think, just speaks wonders to the environment created, which I think, if we can turn a little bit to your own identity. I mean, you've written and spoken publicly, I think, about the LGBTQIA plus and the challenges that I think are sometimes felt, and that invisible weight, which almost compels one to be undeniably good to compensate for who you are. I guess that really would create such a powerful driver for you to create truly safe spaces and organizations, not spaces that we can go, hey, we've got psychological safety, tick, give us an employer of choice award. No, actually, you need that safety for people to feel it when they go home, because I think so often in countries, and I guess growing up in Australia and coming from a modestly affluent background, so many of my friends don't have the same fear of failure. They worry about not achieving some things, but the idea of rebooting their career isn't a stressor, in the sense of, well, you move back in home with mum and dad for a bit and then, okay, reboot might take you 6 months. But so often people in that environment forget other people don't quite have that reboot option. A career change really is a cataclysmic event. And so I suppose I'm interested in how your own identity has helped you to understand the safety that other people need to feel to perform well.
I mean, a very sensitive topic, and I think it's very relevant, I think, in not just in our community, but in different communities as well. As a grad, you might have the same pressures, the same questions that you're asking yourself. As a senior person, having to, manage a younger team, you're asking yourself those self-doubt questions. I think it's very much applicable to everyone. But I think for giving some colors to our community, when I came to Australia, I still didn't really come out to my team or to anyone in Australia, and I felt like if I did say who I am, and that they might judge me, that they might not keep me, because I was waiting to become sponsored. And I remember that I was coming here with my partner, and I didn't tell them that he's my partner, and it only came out when we were doing the sponsorship application, where I said like, oh, what do you want to add? And I said my partner as a de facto applicant. That's kind of like how it came out. So but like in hindsight, I'm thinking about it, I was like, what were you worried about? Like why were you worried about who you truly are? Isn't that the most beautiful thing you can you can have as a human if you talk to someone and say like, you know what, I can see through that person is authentic, that person is genuine, and I can really connect. And I think that's something that I want to tell, you know, the younger generation, is that, you know, just embrace who you are. And I think it's not always easy because you have different upbringings, different journeys, different acceptance levels across your peers, your family, your friends. And when you operate in an environment that's unknown, where you don't have family around you and everything is new to you, it's extra hard, right? And I think those self-doubt questions is something that, yeah, we need to work through, and we work through together. And I think the way I was trying to always think about it, be in my studies or at work, is how do I overcompensate? How do I do extremely well in my studies? How do I do extremely well in my job? And then if I tell them that I'm gay, then maybe they'll accept me. And I think that's always kind of the thinking that I've had throughout my career. So if I do something really well, then they might really accept who I am, which is a crazy way to think about, but that's the reality of us, you know, the majority of us work. I mean, it's a research thing. It's a real thing. It's not like
it's so understandable. I mean, even myself, I mean, in many ways, superficially, I look like a typical boring person who would just naturally fit in a typical Western organization. But even I sometimes wonder, well, you know, am I a little bit too academic? And, you know, am I, you know, too much interested in literature? Because I like performing arts and art in general, does that make me seem a little, I don't know, effete? I won't fit in with the guys at work. And so there is always, I think, for a lot of people, that slight tension of, but once I've established myself, if I'm well regarded enough, then I get to have a personality.
Correct.
But until I've established that, until I've kind of made it into the C-suite or am renowned as the legendary engineer, I don't get to be different. I have to fit in until I'm good enough, and then I can choose to be different. And I think that's a really interesting space.
And you know, I can just give an example on my LinkedIn posting. Like, I mean, I just started, you know, a couple of months ago. It took me months of internal debate to say, am I going to do this? Am I not going to do this? Do I have enough content to share? Will people listen? Will people react? You know, it takes you months, but then once you do it, you go like, oh my God, I impacted this person. I did this, impacted that person. And I think that's what it's really about. I think, you know, how do I make, you know, my mess my superpower? And how do I inspire someone who might be going through the same thing? And it's oftentimes a different perspective. When you post something, the reader takes it from a different lens, and it can apply it to themselves. So oftentimes it's not even the story you intend to share that they get to absorb, but it's a totally different one. And I think that's the beauty of sharing stories, is you get to inspire people that you never thought might read your content in the first place. And I think that's truly, truly a blessing.
And it's why I'm personally so glad you've started sharing your stories, because I find often those who are quickest to share on social media are the people I really don't think should be sharing anything with anyone, if I'm really blunt. And it's the people that are more reticent, who just don't think they've got anything to add to the conversation. Yet when they start unpacking, they're just probably a bad metaphor, but I'll use it. They're the most beautiful onion I've ever seen. And I'm just wanting to go through another layer, because each time it's just a new wonder and a new delight. So I guess behalf of everyone, I think, who follows you on social media, thank you that you started to share, because I think so many of your experiences, particularly around those of acceptance, I mean, as both an immigrant, having a gay identity in a society that's often vehemently heterosexual, it is challenging and it is confronting. And I think that without people like you demonstrating that leadership, hey, you can be a great engineer, you can be a manager, you can be a founder, you can build an organization that scales, not by fitting in, but actually by celebrating your difference and celebrating other people's difference.
Well, I couldn't have said that in a more beautiful way. I can only second that. That is very beautiful.
Finishing up, I'm slightly interested in the Taoist parable, I think it was, of good thing, bad thing, who knows? I suppose at Jarvis, one could almost say, has that become a bit of an operating philosophy?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And kudos to Jay Shetty for bringing that to life. I think he's a very a monk that provides both academic and wisdom from Buddhist wisdom to life. And I've been reading his books and listening to his podcast, and he's talking about this Taoist metaphor where you've got the farmer that's losing a horse, and his son goes like, "Oh, look at the horse, he's running away," and then the dad goes, or shoot, but good thing, bad thing, who knows? And then a few weeks later, the horse comes back with 3 more horses, right? It comes back actually bringing more horses back. So, and he goes like, well, good thing, bad thing, who knows? So I think you have the kid that just tries to ride a horse and then falls and then breaks his leg, and then the dad goes like, well, good thing, bad thing, who knows? And then someone from the military comes knocking on the door and says, hey, we want to bring the kids to the army. And he's got a broken leg, so he can't go. So ultimately, good thing, bad thing, who knows? And the story goes like that. And I think it's kind of like quite replicable in business, because as founders, you're always obsessed, and I think we were obsessed with growth. We were obsessed with numbers at the very beginning, and we were priding ourselves by continuously growing, which means that when something bad happened, we took it personal. We took it at heart, and it erodes you. It puts your armor down a little bit every single time something bad happens, if that's how you frame it. But I think as we built this business, consulting is such a diverse environment that you have so many wins, so many things that go wrong. But as long as you make more things well and right than wrong, then you're winning. But I think getting into that mindset of, hey, I just lost a deal. Yes, it's going to be fine. Hey, this person resigned. You know what? That's okay. You know what? I'm happy for you. All the best. And a good thing, good bad thing. We've had many boomerangs come back. I talk about this client who wants to pause the program of work, which was like 15 people. That was beginning of this year. My mind goes like, oh my God, what am I going to do with these 15 people? And there was no sign of restart. And thanks to the great work from Craig and the relationship that we have with the client, they were able to resolve that problem and then continue and resume the project, but at a much larger scope. So, trying to not attach results to your confidence level and to your emotional state, but rather looking at the work itself, the stuff that you can control, and saying, you know what, I've done the right things that I can control, and the outcome is almost something you can't control. So it becomes a result of your work. Being comfortable with that has helped me stay sane. But I'm not going to lie, the first 3-4 years, you work on adrenaline, and everything is a brand to yourself. Every no you hear from customers is a no to me, no to Pascal. And I think that's where it feeds into my anxiety at times, when you go like, well, did that person say no because of who I am? Did that person say no because of this? And actually trying to distinguish that, and I think I've tried to find the right balance about that now, is really important in business, because you want to be able to distinguish. You are not the business. You are part of the business, but it doesn't define who you are.
But it certainly can be that, that perennial stressor, particularly as you become a more public-facing individual. I mean, I sort of won't name them, but I can think of authors, I can think of CEOs whose companies do experience a hit because they express views that aren't palatable to some people. And I suppose that's just the risk one has to take, good thing, bad thing. Who knows? I guess only time can tell. If we can wrap up here by doing a bit of a lightning round. So first up, the moment you knew Jarvis had become a real company.
When we were 5 people and payroll was bigger than the revenue we were getting at the time.
Oh yeah, that's a moment, I think, when reality bites. The piece of advice you received perhaps early in your career, but you've since concluded was wrong.
I don't know if there's a piece of advice that comes to mind, but I think what really changed in my career or in my journey is to have someone, a stranger, tell you, I believe in you. I believe in you, and I can see your potential, and that you will be achieving great things in the future. That blew my mind. That was from a mentor from Janine Garner, and I think she said it to me while we were doing a leadership training, and I was like, wait, how come she sees that about me? What's happening? And I think my advice that I can give business leaders is pass that message on. to your team, pass that message on to the people that you can see are able to create great things, because you have little understanding of how much impact that has to that one person.
Yeah. I think that's such a beautiful message there. If you see it and you respect it, say it. Just let them know.
Absolutely.
And finally, what do you think most AI consultants are not honest enough about in their client conversations?
Why they want to implement AI in the first place.
Have to agree on that one. Pascal Uerlings, on the subject of leadership, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks for having me.